generations to come.
Well, welcome to another edition of the TDN Writers Room podcast, and it's a special edition. This is going to be our year-end, quote, holiday episode. As you can see with my colleagues, I'm the only one that didn't come ready for the party. This is boring, a blue jacket. But Randy Moss, I'm Randy Moss and Zoe Cadman. I'm Bill Finley, of course. You guys did yourselves proud. Nice outfits.
Thank you. Thank you. And Randy, I'm going to let you describe mine just in its full glory for those of you that are just listening to this. Let's have it, Randy.
Rudolph the Red-Nosed Beaver? Is that what we were talking about before?
I'm wearing a Rudolph onesie.
So Zoe tells me, just go get your best Christmas jumper. Well, my first question was, what is a jumper? That's something that is not part of the lingo over here on this side of the pond. But apparently jumper is a sweater of which Bill and I both own absolutely zero.
Yes.
Yes. So I just had to make do with a hat and whatever.
Well, at least you got the hat, Randy.
Yeah,
it
looks
great.
good.
And they also said, come with the cocktail. Bill, you got one of those.
Yeah.
Or not a cocktail, but
Cheers.
Wine.
adult beverage. So Merry Christmas, everyone.
Merry
Cheers.
Christmas.
All right, guys. We'll be throwing out some questions for Zoe and Randy and myself. Also, we've had some viewers write in a couple questions. We'll try to get to those and have our experts, especially Zoe being the ex-jockey, try to explain and answer some of the questions. But guys, this is fun. We got so much to talk about. And this segment one is going to begin with this question. What is the moment, Randy Moss, that got you hooked on horse racing?
Interesting. Yeah. I don't know if it was an exact moment. I suppose you could call it a moment. I was born and raised in Hot Springs, Arkansas, so I never really had much of a chance. But when I was a kid, one of my very first memory, my very first realization that there was a racetrack in Hot Springs, Arkansas, is that when you drove past Oaklawn Park back in the day, and we're talking like late 60s now, right? Mid 60s. I was a little kid sitting in the backseat of my parents' car. And it used to be a little like Saratoga in that there were stables on the opposite side of Central Avenue, which is the main drag that goes through Hot Springs, Arkansas. And so the police, the crossing guards, would stop the traffic, which back then wasn't all that substantial in Hot Springs on Central Avenue, as horses cross the street, just like you see outside Saratoga during training and racing hours, right? And so I would sit there in the backseat of the car and I would see these beautiful racehorses crossing the street in front of me, and the exercise riders on their backs. And it was like, that's one of my earliest memories is watching that. And it just snowballed from there. I grew infatuated with it. And here we are.
Zoe?
Well, I just want to pose another question to Randy. Hot Springs, Arkansas. So growing up there as a kid, did you find your way to the racetrack at any point? Did you go and be like the proverbial hot walker? Did you go that route?
No, I didn't go that route. I was more of the front side route. I grew up in a neighborhood filled with horse trainers. Okay. Bob Holtz was a next door neighbor on one side, Jimmy Garroot on my other side, a trainer named Bob Irwin, who used to work for Marion Vanberg back in the day, David Vance down the street. I hung out with all their kids and stuff. And I actually started handicapping for a newspaper under someone else's name when I was 13 years old. So, yeah, I've been involved. And my parents were huge racing fans. My dad owned a horse that was horribly slow. Yeah, that's kind of how I got into it. What about you?
Oh, that's a hell of a street to grow up on. I mean, that's like an Oaklawn Hall of Fame street to grow up on. You had absolutely no choice, because I know exactly where that is. I'm going to say that I was probably privileged in the fact that I had ponies as a kid. Yeah, cheers to that. What are you drinking, by the way, Randy?
This is a very highbrow premium margarita. Right here.
Very nice. I'll just stick with my Heineken because it's 1 p.m. All right. So I'm going to say I was privileged. I had ponies growing up as a kid, and I grew up in Somerset, which is the southwest part of England, and jump racing is prevalent. And I honestly didn't really like watching it on the TV because it took too long and I thought it was a bit boring. However, during school time, we all got a chance to do work experience. And the closest racing yard to me was Philip Hobbs. So me and my friend Rosie, we both applied to go for our week out to Philip Hobbs. Now, I had a pony who was pretty quick and liked going fast. And I'm like, oh, I'm going to go to a racing yard. This is going to be so cool. And rode out for Philip Hobbs for a week, got run off with a couple times and went really fast. Like his gallops go uphill and they stop at a road that goes downhill. I went all the way down the road on one of these like jumper horses. And I got hooked. I'm like, this is really cool. I already had planned when I left school at 15 that I was going to go and be a working pupil in a 3-day event yard for Clarissa Strawn down in Devon. So I actually had signed up for that and I went down there for a year. But the racehorses always stuck with me. We had yearlings to break, and then I found my way going to Newmarket. And I just loved it. So that was the beginning of it. But the clincher that brought me to the States was getting home from the pub one Friday evening, Saturday evening. Yeah, I think it was. And we'd got a kebab from the kebab shop in Newmarket. We go to my friend's house, Jackie, and her husband, who was traveling head lad for Gosden at that time, was watching something on the telly. And I'm like, what are we watching? We got in, we stumbled in the door, and it was the Breeders' Cup. And I'd never heard of it. And I think it was 93, so it was out in Southern California. I just remember seeing palm trees and nice weather. And, it was pissing down with rain in Newmarket and thinking, I want to go to America because that looks awesome. Don't even remember what Breeders' Cup it was, but I just remember seeing palm trees and thinking that was fabulous. And the very next year, I hopped on a plane and came to the States.
So as far as my story goes, a lot of people have the same story. Most people that you hear about that get interested in racing, it's usually through my dad took me to the track. My older brother, my uncle John took me to the track, etc. Well, both my father and my older brother, who was 10 years older than me, were big racing fans. And with my brother being 10 years older than me, when I was 6, he had a driver's license. So we went to there were stories about him babysitting me where he didn't tell my parents what we were going to do. Instead, we lived in Cleveland, went to Northfield Park. That's where he babysit me at the Trotters there. But I think that what really changed everything or put me into the area where like, okay, this is the coolest thing in the world. I really want to do this is Secretariat. And not necessarily Secretariat 73 year. The first time I ever went to Saratoga was in 1972. My parents took me there, and Secretariat won the Sanford Stakes. And I don't believe he was even the favorite in that race, but there was so much hype about these, great 2-year-olds and all these stars, and he's a star in the making. And I saw this big, monstrous chestnut horse win. Said, oh my God, this is something ridiculously special. And I started following, I was following racing the whole time, but I was especially following Secretariat. Got to see him run twice as a 2-year-old, as he also ran in the Garden State Stakes. We lived in Philadelphia at the time. So I got to see 2 of his 2-year-old races and a bunch of 3. But I'm sure that's a story a lot of people had. How many racing fans did Secretariat create? Well, I'm one.
That's really cool. How old were you?
Really cool.
I don't want to give away my age. I was 11.
11. That's really
11
cool.
years old. Yeah, absolutely. And I'll never forget that.
My uncle bought one of the very first video cameras, and late in his life, my aunt told me that he had a whole box of cassette tapes just sitting there, stored, that had never been developed and all that, from this video camera. So I went and got them all developed, and lo and behold, there was a picture, there was video of me at Oaklawn Park when I was -1 month. It was my parents on the apron, and my mother was very pregnant with me.
Did she have a cigarette? And was she drinking? Because that was all the rage.
She smoked, but she did not have a cigarette at that particular time. So I could say my first trip to the racetrack, I was -1 month old.
There you go.
Very cool.
All right, guys, let's move on. The favorite racing moment that you have witnessed. I'll start this one off. There's a couple that I could talk about, but I think mine was the Affirmed Alydar Belmont. And, that was one of the greatest races in the history of the sport. I don't know how you can ever top that. It was a little bit like Sunday Silence and Easy Goer. Everybody was either a Affirmed fan or an Alydar fan. For whatever reason, I became an Affirmed fan. Matter of fact, his Derby was the first ever Kentucky Derby I went to in 1978. Also saw the Preakness, so I was able to see the full Triple Crown. But when he came into the Belmont, and I don't know how I can use words to describe this race because it won't do it justice. But to see these two great horses battle every inch of the way down the stretch, and to see my favorite horse, Affirm, prevail, that is absolutely an indelible moment in my fanhood as a racing person. The Affirm Valley Dar Belmont of 1978.
Wow, Zoe.
We discussed it last week or a couple of weeks ago with Zenyatta winning the Breeders' Cup at Santa Anita when they basically took the roof off at Santa Anita. That moment will stay with me forever. But if you want something more interesting, it was another one, could be my second trip out to Southern California working for Michael Dickinson, taking DeHaas to the Del Mar Derby. I'd been out 6 weeks prior and he'd run in the swaps and was second to Thunder Gulch and had a heat stroke on the way back to the barn. And that was a whole new thing for me. I'd never seen a heat stroke fresh off the plane. What is this horse doing? Is he rolling on the ground? Got that all figured out. Had specific instructions from Michael Dickinson, and you can appreciate this, Randy. When he wins the Del Mar Derby, Zoe, okay, Michael, when he wins, this was like the day before, before you get to the winner's circle, you must pull Renee Douglas off of the horse and just soak. I don't care if you soak the jockey as well. Just soak him in water and make sure he doesn't have another heat stroke. So he did win the Del Mar Derby. And I did pull Renee Douglas off of the horse. And he's like, what are you doing? I'm like, get off now. And just sprayed everybody that was there in water. We put him back on, a very wet jockey. And I was the groom, the hot walker, the exercise rider. I have the picture of myself in the winner's circle at Del Mar holding DeHaas with the Del Mar Derby. That was cool. Very, very cool. And Renee Douglas always said he'd stake me. So fast forward, I was leading apprentice at Arlington Park, and Renee's leading rider, and he looked at me one day. We've met before. And I'm like, yeah, you never staked me. Remember DeHaas? He tried to write me a check that day, and I'm like, no. I really needed it back then, but I don't need it now. Thank you.
Wow, mine's pretty easy. It was the 2015 Belmont Stakes with American Pharoah, sweeping the Triple Crown, right? First time in 37 years. The crowd reaction, just unbelievable. It was just amazing to be there, and kind of a funny TV story that goes along with it. It was obvious leading up to the race, even though it was the Belmont Stakes, even though it was the Triple Crown, it failed so many times, he was going to win. He was going to win. I mean, there was really not that much competition in there against him. He was going to control the pace. And so the plan was NBC, producer, Rob Hyland, like the greatest sports producer in the country, make sure once that horse crosses the finish line, you guys lay out and let the moment breathe, because it's going to be unbelievable at Belmont Park when that happens. Tom Hammond was the host. Jerry Bailey and I were on set. So that's what happens. Crosses the finish line. He wins. We lay out. We let the moment breathe. The roar is so deafening that Jerry and I could have been having a conversation next to each other, and we wouldn't have been able to hear each other, right? So we let it breathe. We let it breathe. We let it breathe for what seemed like an eternity. And then Rob gets in our ears and says, okay, you guys can talk. And Tom says something, and Jerry says something because he's usually first after a race. And then it was my turn. And I said, I've been to a lot of big time sporting events in America. I've been to the Super Bowl. I've been to Olympics. I've been to some of the loudest NFL stadiums. I have never in my life heard a sustained roar as loud as what we just heard when American Pharoah crossed the finish line. Now, 1,000, 2 1,000. Tom Hammond comes in, says, I've been to a lot of major sporting events in the country. I don't think I've ever heard a roar as loud as this. This is the crowd, just unbelievable. And I'm thinking, okay, I guess he didn't hear me. I know it's loud, but I just said that. And that's kind of odd, So then I get home And my wife said, yeah, what a race. How come you didn't say anything after the race? I said, what do you mean? And she said, you didn't say anything. I said, Tom said something. Jerry said something. Tom said something again. You didn't say anything. After the race was over, the crowd noise was so incredibly loud. It was distorting all the microphones. So they turned off my mic and they turned off Jerry's mic because Tom's mic was being incredibly distorted by the noise coming through our microphones. Then when it was time for us to talk, they turned on Jerry's mic, but they neglected to turn on my mic. So one of the greatest moments in thoroughbred racing history, NBC was there. We were chronicling it, and I'm nowhere to be found as soon as the race is over and American Pharoah crosses the finish. I thought that's an incredibly funny story, and they've, at least from my perspective, and they've apologized to me 100 times. I think it's funny. I'm not upset about it. I think it's funny. Anyway.
So I think all three of us enjoy playing the races as well as we like watching them, talking about it. Everybody in the sport has one of those nightmarish, bad luck, tough beat stories. I have the opposite. I have the greatest good luck story in the horse racing. Take us back to the time in 1988, the John A. Morris Handicap at Saratoga, which is now the Personal Ensign Stakes. I wasn't a big pick six bettor. I invested maybe $100 or something in the pick six on the day of the John A. Morris Stakes. I get through leg 1, leg 2, leg 3, leg 4, leg 5. I'm like, holy crap, I might win this. The John A. Morris that year had a 4-horse field. In my pick six, I had the 3-5 favorite and like the 7-5 second choice. The other 2 horses were like, yeah, get them out of here. They're 10-1, 12-1, something like that. All of a sudden, the skies open up at Saratoga and it's hell. The skies come down. The trees are hit by lightning. There's flooding, everything. Ladies and gentlemen, we have to cancel the remainder of the card. What we will do for the pick six is to pay off for the people that have 5. And I actually got 2 tickets because I was live with 2 horses in the John A. Morris. So I collected the pick six, paid $4,700. I collected $9,400 for hitting this pick six. Now, I'm not thinking anything at the time other than, well, that's cool. That's fair. They ran the race the next day as an exhibition race with the same 4 horses, and I would have lost.
Oh, my God. All right, Zoe.
That is awesome. I don't have much luck betting, so I don't have a good luck betting. I have a coulda, shoulda, woulda one, and I'm going to go back to the Dickinson era. We had a horse that had run a couple of times already. We were down in South Carolina. Michael liked to take them hunting. So I'd been hunting this horse. His name was Crowning Halo, and jumping him. And he didn't really like to run much. So this was just to freshen him up and make him a happier horse. So we get back to Fairhill, and this horse is working lights out. I'm like, this horse is going to win. They're like, oh, no, he's a pig. He's useless, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, I'm telling you, he's going to win. I told everyone that would listen that he's going to win. So I get in my little Ford Escort and drive off to the OTB on my own, and I'm going to bet on him. Didn't really bet a lot, but I knew this horse was going to win. So I had $500, which was about 3 weeks' wages back then. And I put $500 on the nose to win on this horse. And they were running at Belmont Park. Jerry Bailey actually rode him. I'm like, see, he's going to win. But he was big odds. He was about 25-1. And all of a sudden, all the OTBs went down. And it was pissing with rain there. Everything went down. And they're like, we're going to run this race for purse money only, which I didn't have a clue what that was. Purse money only, so I still get paid, right? This horse parks at 25-1, and I go up to the window because I didn't understand what purse money only was, thinking that I'd won this major score. And they're like, here you are, here's your $500 back.
Oh,
and I was absolutely gutted. So, yeah, that's my story. I don't have any good luck stories with gambling because I'm a horrible gambler. But that would have changed my life at that very point.
Oh, boy.
Yeah.
So, all right, my turn. About 35 years ago, I developed a close friendship with a great guy named Dave Thomas, not the Wendy's Dave Thomas, but an attorney in Little Rock, Arkansas. Loved horse racing, loved betting on the horses. I was in the newspaper business at the time, but first and foremost, I was a handicapper. And I knew everything about the horses at Oaklawn and Louisiana Downs and Remington Park. I did speed figures, pace figures, trainer profiles. Sometimes I was with the clockers in morning workouts. I paid for VHS copies of all the races so I could study and make the trip notes. This was before you could get any of that stuff online, right? So now we're at the beginning of the pick six craze. And my friend Dave asked me, how come you never really bet much on the pick six? And the answer was simple. I'm in Arkansas. I'm working for a newspaper. I'm making nothing. And I got kids. I can't afford to do this. So Dave came back to me with a plan. He said, look, I'll provide the funds to play the pick six. And my handicapping would be my sweat equity in the tickets. So Dave was a very good handicapper himself. And we'd sit down and put our heads together whenever a pick six carryover pool got up to six figures. And the first time that happened, our very first bet together was at Remington Park, November 29, 1989. We have a phone conversation. We put together a ticket. He drives up to Remington Park. I think I go Christmas shopping. Okay. I come back. This is before TVG, before internet. You had no way of watching the races unless you were there. I got like 10 messages on my answering machine. All right. First leg of the pick six, third race, $76. 1860, 940, 1160, 1020. And then Garrett Gomez brought in the final leg for us at 960 on a horse named Gundy Gary. We had the only winning ticket for more than $300,000.
Wow.
At Louisiana Downs, about a year and a half after that, we hit a pick six, the only winning ticket for more than $500,000. There was a really interesting story behind that, but it's a little too time consuming, maybe some other time. Anyway, at one point, together, we had the largest tickets ever cashed in the states of Oklahoma and Louisiana, but that was more than 3 decades ago.
Wow.
It's long since been topped, but yeah, I have some pretty nice memories of gambling stories back in the pick six heydays in the late 80s and early 90s.
I'm
Yeah,
impressed.
I bet you can't top that. All right, so here's another question. I'll start with you, Zoe. If you could have dinner with one person in racing history, who would it be?
The Queen Mum.
Oh,
Yeah, the Queen Mum. And I would sit there and drink a gin and tonic with her and discuss all things racing with her, because to me, growing up, you had the Queen and the Queen Mum, and she was just fabulous. She was always kind of half pickled when you saw her. She loved her racing. We know the Queen loved her racing, but the Queen Mum was, she was just amazing. She could tell you every pedigree, and she did all the breeding. She was fabulous. So to me, that would probably be the most interesting person I could think of, would be the Queen Mum, especially growing up in England and watching the royals' love of horse racing.
mine would be a dead heat. I'm sorry, I got to pick two. It would be Ben Jones. I'm a huge history buff in American horse racing, and he had so many with the Calumet horses back in the day. I would love to hear some of his stories about some of those great horses of yesteryear. And then Jimmy Winkfield, the African-American jockey around the turn of the century, because I don't know if you've ever heard the whole Jimmy Winkfield story. It's part of a book that a guy named Ed Hotailing wrote, who actually was the guy that brought down Jimmy the Greek, but that's another story. But this guy, Jimmy Winkfield, has the most interesting story of any horse racing figure I've ever come across. It's unbelievable. I've been waiting for the movie to come out. It would dwarf Seabiscuit and Secretariat for sheer interest in terms of what all happened to this guy in the United States and in Europe, and then back in the United States. So it would have to be a long dinner, Bill, because I'd have a tape recorder or my phone recording, and I'd have to ask Jimmy and get it on record, to go into detail about all these experiences and what happened to him along the way, so that I could be part of the movie whenever it's finally made. But it's going to be amazing.
So I've got one that I don't think many people would expect are going to surprise you a little bit. Mine is Oscar Barrera.
Oh, whoa.
Now, for people who grew up in the 70s and 80s following New York racing, they remember very well what Barrera was able to do. And we talk a lot on the podcast about, cheating trainers. And, we look at these guys and they say, okay, he claims a horse for 15,000, runs him back 3 weeks later for 17.5, improves 5 or 6 buyer numbers and gets the win. Oh man, that's a juice guy. Oscar Barrera was the king. And I'm allowed to say this because he's dead, so nobody's going to sue me. He did things that have never been done before and have never been done since. And whatever he was using it blows me away. He would claim a horse for $10,000 on a Saturday, run it back for $20,000 on a Wednesday, and the horse would go off at 6-5 and win. He won, and one time he won 6 races with a single horse in one month. Now, what I'd have to do is I get Oscar shit-faced. Okay, get him really drunk and say, Oscar, please don't take these secrets to the grave. I want to know your secrets. All these years later, I'm still fascinated by it because, again, we're suspicious of trainer A, we're suspicious of trainer B. No one has ever been able to do what this guy does. He claimed Shifty Chic and almost beat Slew of Gold in the Woodward or whatever race that was. And then at the end of his career, he couldn't win a race to save his life. So, but he took those secrets to the grave. I want to exhume him and get him to tell me what the hell he was doing.
That's awesome. Now, I have trouble doing this when I'm not drinking. We'll see how I can do it right now. So, cheers. The TDN Writers Room is brought to you by Keeneland, and what a record-breaking year it was for Keeneland. In September, they held the highest grossing auction in Keeneland history. The fall meet saw record purses and all sources wagering. They launched a new sales event at the Breeders' Cup Championship sale, and the November sale saw a vibrant global market and a new record median. And now we're on to January. The 3-day January sale will be held from January the 13th to the 15th. Make plans to attend. We'll be right back after this message from Keeneland.
For quality at every level. For accomplished collector's items. For breeding's strongest foundation. For champions in the making. For New Year opportunities. Look to January. The Keeneland January Horses of All Ages sale, beginning Monday, January 13th.
Well, every week we bring you the fastest horse of the week. Now it's time for fastest horse of the year. Also brought to you by the Fast Sires at WinStar Farm, which is appropriate because the fastest horse of the year is also a new WinStar sire, and that would be Cogburn. Yes, he was beaten in the Breeders' Cup Turf Sprint, one of the worst rides of Irad Ortiz's life, but he got a 114 buyer speed figure at Saratoga in the Jaipur on June the 8th to top the list of all of the top buyers of 2024. Here you see the top 9. The ill-fated Overcharged, another turf sprinter, was second at 113. And you look at him on down the line, Sierra Leone, the winner of the Breeders' Cup Classic, got a 112. What's interesting, only one horse had more than, well, actually Arthur's Ride did have 2 at more than 110. Fierceness had 3, including In Defeat, but he had 3 buyer speed figures of 110 or higher. And that's why some people, like Andy Beyer, for example, believe that Fierceness should be the 3-year-old champion and not Sierra Leone, and that Fierceness maybe even should be Horse of the Year and not Torpedo Anna. So about Cogburn, more about Cogburn now. His next chapter at WinStar, the 4-time graded 6 winner, will stand for a fee of $30,000 in 2025, one of 6 Grade 1 winners for his sire, Not This Time. And he'll be the first son of Not This Time to stand at WinStar. The farm will also welcome 2 other new recruits for the 2025 breeding season. Timberlake, the winner of the Champagne, the only Grade 1 winning 2-year-old other than Practical Joke to stand in Kentucky. He'll be standing for $20,000, while Heartland, a son of Justify, who earned a 90 buyer speed figure in his career debut, will stand at WinStar for a fee of $10,000.
Well, for this special end of the year show, we asked our viewers and people who watch the show to write in some questions, some ones that maybe they can get some answers from the trio of us three. And I'll take the first one. I have a question from David. I'm sorry, I don't know his last name, but he wants to know why final scratches are not posted online and to betting apps until sometimes around 11 o'clock in the morning. And his point is he's up at 7 o'clock trying to handicap and do all sorts of different tracks. And he needs those scratches and doesn't understand why it takes so long to get them out. David, I don't have an answer for you other than it's a bad idea. You make an absolutely good point. There's no reason why this, I would say, if you want to have a czar of racing type thing, that every track has to have a rule that by 9 a.m. local time, the scratches have to be out. I know when I do my radio show on Saturdays with Dave Johnson, and we'll be coming up on like 11:30 talking about a race at, say, Oaklawn, just to pick a track. And then all of a sudden, we find out an hour later, well, the horse we just talked about for 20 minutes is scratched. Which is kind of embarrassing, but there's nothing we can do about it. If Zoe and Randy, if you have any input on that, let me know. But I don't really have much to say other than it's one of those things that racing doesn't get right.
I've got a completely different take on it. If we can have differences of opinion, I guess we can. I think back in the day, what you're saying, I think I completely agree with. It should be a lot earlier. But now you've got horse safety issues and you've got state vet examinations on race day of all the horses in that day. And it has delayed the whole process of which horses are going to be allowed to run and which horses might be scratched. So as a result, now Churchill Downs still has an 8 a.m. scratch time, but a lot of times, like as we tape this today, they didn't announce their scratches until 9:30 because the state vets weren't through with their jobs. Naira has a 10 a.m. scratch time, Woodbine 10:30, Fairgrounds 11 a.m. or noon, depending on the first post time. Penn National is running right now. They have an 11 a.m. scratch time. And these racetracks, once they get past that scratch time, do a pretty good job of getting it out and disseminating it to the public through their own websites or through Equibase within a half hour of when scratch time is actually finished. So times have changed. And I think that's why that David is having some frustration because he can't get the scratches. The good news, David, nobody else is getting them either. So it's pari-mutual. It's you against you. And you're not at any disadvantage right now because of that.
All right. The second question is for Zoe in particular. This is from Patricia Wonderly from Highlands Ranch, Colorado. She writes, when one sees foreign horses at the sales, e.g. Tattersalls and Arcana, the horses appear in the sales ring in gear with a surcingle and a blanket or half blanket over their flanks. Why? It would seem as though this getup, especially the blanket part, obscures key parts of the horse's conformation. Zoe, got an answer for that?
I do. It's bloody cold in England. And that is my answer. Now, all the pre-inspection is already done by the time they get into the sales ring. A lot of these sales are held in the evening or early afternoon, and they look nice, the blankets, and it shows off that the stable, say, Sir Mark Prescott takes his in blankets. Actually, we used to ride them into the ring. But it can show off whoever is consigning the horse. But people will have already seen that horse if they're doing their due diligence, seen it without the blanket, and that is just purely for looks and for warmth. So I pretty much think that's universal. And I need a refill. I cannot only just have one beer.
Me too, but it takes too long to make these.
We'll wait for Zoe to pick up that extra beer. But in the meantime, Randy, we've got a question for you. This comes in from Rick Cola. It says, does a Beyer speed figure matter if it is a route or a sprint? Example, if Beyer is 100 in routes and 75 in sprints, do you use the 100 no matter the distance, or do you have to use routes and sprints separately? Also, does turf and dirt matter in either sprints or routes?
Well, Rick, the Beyer speed figures, as well as Thoroughgraph, Ragozin, et cetera, are all designed to be consistent across all the various distances. It involves something that's called a parallel time chart that uses a deceleration formula. Parallel time chart looks something like this. We have it on computer now. This is like 30 years old. I had it laminated. It needs to have a new lamination, I think. I just kind of keep this for a keepsake. But that enables us to compare different running times at different distances. It's how we know that 5.5 furlongs in 104 and 3 is equivalent to 6 furlongs in 111, which is equivalent to 6.5 furlongs in 117 and 2 and 7 furlongs in 123 and 4. They have to, those relationships have to be tweaked from track to track because of run up distances, et cetera. But that's the starting point. And we can also extend that out to 2-turn races. We know from the data that at Churchill Downs, 6 furlongs in 111 is equivalent to 1 mile and an eighth in 152 and 3/5. Okay. Now that's the speed figures though. And then the handicapping though comes in, because obviously not all horses are capable of running as well at 6 furlongs as they are at 1 mile and an eighth. So that's where you have to make the judgment in your handicapping. The speed figures are designed to be the same across the board. And that's the same on turf as well. We've taken a lot of pains, the Beyer Speed Figure Group, of trying to get figures for turf and for Tapeta to be exactly equivalent to the figures on the dirt. But they are designed to be the same at all distances. You just have to decide whether a horse can be as effective at distance A as he can be at distance B. The TDN Writers Room is brought to you by the PHBA, the Pennsylvania Horse Breeders Association. Big news! The 2025 Pennsylvania Stallion and Boarding Farm Directory is now available online at pabred.com. Registered PA bred sired by a PA stallion will receive 40% in breeder awards and up to 40% in owner bonuses for placing first through third. Pennsylvania will also welcome, this is more big news, 8 new stallions for 2025, including Alejandro, a Kirtland's son of Rachel's Valentina, a daughter of Rachel Alexandra. Enticed, who previously stood at Darley's Jonabell Farm and has produced several stakes winners from his first 2 crops. Imposing, how about this for a pedigree? Imposing is by Gunrunner out of Untappable. And then there's Tyson. Forget about the debacle we saw on Netflix. I couldn't even get it up to get it on my computer because of all the streaming problems. Anyway, don't hold that against Tyson the Stallion. He's Canadian's champion older male in 2023. Also, there's Zozos, a grade 1 place son of Munnings, who we were talking about all the time for the Breeders' Cup Dirt Mile. To learn more about the PA Bred program, go to pabred.com or call 610-444-1050.
PA Bred, I think we've built a brand at this point.
It's excitement at every step.
Roses for Deborah just set a new track record.
On average, for the past decade, Pennsylvania paid over $28 million a year in Breeders' Awards, restricted races, and owner bonuses. Plus, PA Bred shine on the world's biggest stage. Just 3 states have bred more Breeders' Cup winners. Learn more at pabred.com.
With some of the fullest fields in the country and quality racing year-round, there's never been a better time to reap the rewards of breeding and racing in Kentucky. Purse money in Kentucky is at an all-time high, as is average purse per race, outpacing California, Florida, and New York. Kentucky breds. Breed them, raise them, race them. We all win.
Lots of highlights, as always, for Kentucky Breds in calendar year 2024. They won all across the world, 7 wins in the Breeders' Cup World Championships. They swept this year's classic races, Mystic Dan, Seize the Gray, and Dornoch in the Triple Crown. Kentucky Breds also shined in Europe. City of Troy, just named the European Horse of the Year. Ramatuelle, opera singer, they all were Kentucky Breds who won important races across the pond. Laurel River, speaking of across the pond, won the Dubai World Cup. And the number 1 horse also on the Longines World's Best Racehorse rankings because he was so strong in winning in Dubai. And in the Bluegrass, of course, there is more about Kentucky. Kentucky's average purse per race, more about Kentucky racing, $104,700. Average per race. It outpaces all other leading racing jurisdictions. The fullest fields in the country, quality year-round racing at Kentucky's 5 tracks. There is obviously no better time to breed and to race in the Bluegrass than right now.
Well, why don't we pick up with some more questions from our listeners and our readers? And Zoe, I'll start with you on this one. And this was a question from Tim, who is an avid fan, husband, father of 2, And is Derby Maz? I don't quite understand what that means, but anyways, Tim, we thank you for the question. He says the Breeders' Cup is a success. About 150 million was wagered on the 2 days. Horses ship in from nearly everywhere. Yet since the Breeders' Cup began in 1984, total wagering on horse racing in the U.S. has fallen. Certain states, California, Oklahoma, Washington, show troubling breeding trends. Question is, what else can be done by the Breeders' Cup to help move the industry forward?
Oof, do we have long enough for this? It's basically on the heels of everything we've always talked about on this show. The fall crop has gone down, right? So you're going to have less racing anyway. There are less races. The handle's going to go down. The purses are through the roof. I don't know if there's anything that the Breeders' Cup per se can do. We know that people like betting on the biggest days in horse racing. You can see that from Kentucky Derby, from Breeders' Cup, from the Preakness, California Crown, the Pegasus, the Saudi Cup. People like the big days now, and that's something that Breeders' Cup started when they started back in 1984, and that's something that we're probably going to see more of working forward. So I'm not sure there's an exact answer to this. It's a scary thought. It really is. It's a good question, Tim, but I can't answer it. And I'm pretty sure that was a typo. Derby mad.
So the Breeders' Cup is sitting on rainy day reserves of a little less than $100 million right now. The Jockey Club has about half that, a little less than half that. So, I mean, the Breeders' Cup is not responsible for everything that's gone wrong in California or elsewhere, and they're not responsible for cleaning it up. But as far as, things they could do maybe with that money to be helpful in some way to places like Southern California, which are so important to the overall success of the Breeders' Cup in the future and of thoroughbred racing in general, I mean, maybe there is something that they could do, along those lines. I don't know specifically what it would be, but if they have a rainy day fund that's got that much money in it, it's a severe thunderstorm right now in some parts of the country, especially Southern California. So, I would.
That's sitting on $100 million?
A little less than $100 million. Yeah.
Wow. I didn't know that.
Yeah. So maybe there is something that they could do along the way to sort of, maybe give a little shot in the arm to some of these places.
All right. Well, Tim, we thank you. That was a good question. And then we're going to throw this one back to Randy. This is from Efron Deonda. And this is something, Randy, I don't necessarily know the answer to this myself. I'm sure you will. So I'd be very interested to hear what you have to say. It says, first and foremost, great job on the TDN Writers Room. Thank you, Efron.
Thank you.
Why are works for horses primarily stable in the East labeled as B and H, breezing for B, H handily for handily, obviously, on the racing form for those out there in the West? Here's one example from the Derby. Stronghold works on April 20th and is labeled as an H. On April 28th, he goes 5 furlongs at Churchill Downs, and that's a B. We've been conditioned to think that B is for breezing and H for handily. Why the difference? Recent Breeders' Cup PPs are another example of the difference in East and West Coast versus East and West Coast works.
Efren's not going to like my answer on this. When I first read this question, I thought to myself, it's because that's the way it's always been done in horse racing. And so I reached out to Gary Young, clocker extraordinaire in Southern California, and I read him that question from Efren. And I said, so what would your response be? And he laughed and he said, my response would be, that's the way it's always been done. Right? Efren, my advice to you would be to ignore the B's and the H's, because when you look at Southern California racetracks, almost every workout, top to bottom, is an H for handily, which is supposed to mean that the horses are being urged a little bit in workouts coming to the wire. On the East Coast, even in Kentucky, almost every workout, except for maybe a rare exceptions, is a B for breezing. But some of those horses are being encouraged in the run to the wire. So just don't pay any attention to the B's and the H's and just look at the workout times or whether they're coming from the gate, or maybe if you can find videos online, whether they're breezing in company or something like that. Zoe, you see a lot more workouts than I do. What are your thoughts on that?
Watch XBTV. There's a selfless plug for you right there. Watch XBTV. I think there was one horse in Southern California that got a B a couple of times, and that was American Pharaoh. Breezing.
Well, first of all, I mean, if you've ever been in the press box with clockers or the clocker stand with clockers, and you've spent a lot of time there, and so have I, it's unbelievable what the best clockers in the country can do when you're talking about after a break, after a maintenance break.
Right.
And a clocker might have 3 different sets of horses going on one stopwatch. And it's all he can do to just get the times right, much less identify the horses. And now if you're going to ask the clocker to do all that and then be able to tell you whether the horse breezed handily or breezing, I think you're asking a little too much there in a lot of situations. So I would just look at the workout times and not pay too much attention to the other designations.
All right, I'll take this one. It's a question from Richard Zwern. And he says, I regard the TDN so highly. Thank you, Richard. The only possible constructive feedback I could offer is that this is not an easy game. And too often in the press, we only hear about these monstrous successes. There's a great deal of heartbreak, patience, and expense and frustration, and it seems to be ignored by all outlets, as if we were almost trying to lure folks to the industry by giving them a true snapshot. It ought to be addressed because I believe there is a place for it in this dialogue. Do you agree? Yes, I do agree. But Richard, I think that what I don't agree with you is that the TDN is not a Pollyanna-ish publication. I mean, there's certain lines we don't cross. I think we try very hard not to embarrass people and that sort of thing. But you take a situation where if there's a story is out there and it's negative, we will report on it. Matter of fact, I dealt with this year writing about how I thought HISA should be able to test the horses in the 2-year-old sales before they breeze, make that their official first workout instead of when they get to the racetrack, because there was a couple problems this year with a guy using clenbuterol. And I don't know who the person is, but somebody actually said because I wrote that, they were going to start a boycott of the advertisers. They wanted all the Ocala people to boycott the TDN. So, you know, the one thing that we don't do, and as a journalist, I've never really felt quite clear about this. I would agree that one thing we don't do, and is that when a guy buys a horse for $2 million and he goes out and wins by 8 first time out, wow, isn't this great? Isn't this guy smart? Isn't this an unbelievable race? We don't, and neither does anyone else ever write about the $2 million horse that runs one time, gets beat 17 lengths, and becomes a show horse for your neighbor's, niece. I don't know. That is far too complicated to go down that rabbit hole. But those are my thoughts on that. Randy, you got anything to add?
Yeah, and then the situation that we find ourselves in is that if you have a guy that wins the Kentucky Derby, let's say with a $2 million yearling purchase, and he's had 8 other 7-figure yearling purchases that didn't even make the races, if you focus on that, or if you mention that, then people say, oh, you're just focusing on the negative. This guy just won the Kentucky Derby. I mean, why don't you focus on that? You got to bring up the negatives about, but yeah, I mean, it's tough.
Case in point, the Green Monkey, right? Nobody can possibly forget about the $16 million 2-year-old that never did diddly squat. So that's your case in point. It's not an easy game. I've had mares. I've tried to breed mares. I am the unluckiest person in the world. Died foaling. The mare died. Bred a show horse. Bred another show horse. The foal died. It's a hard game. It's hard. I'm not going to say it's not. That's why you have to really embrace the good things that happen in this sport, because it's so hard, regardless of how much money you put in. We've known people that have put millions of dollars into the game, and just to get that one win is the best feeling on earth.
And then when you breed a Kentucky Derby winner, we'll focus on the Kentucky Derby winner, and we won't focus on all the hardships that you've had along the way to get there.
Right. As we all know, the TDN Writers Room is brought to you by XBTV, and it's time now, guys, not for the work of the week, but the XBTV work of the year. Can you guys even hesitate to guess, Randy, Bill, what the work could be? Because I couldn't, but I'm going to give you guys a shot.
Well, I can guess, but I've seen your script already online, so that would be cheating. Could I have guessed before that? No way in hell.
All right. What was the most watched work on XBTV this year? Well, it was easy. It was Domestic Product and Sierra Leone working 4 furlongs on May the 18th at Saratoga. Domestic Product would go on to win the Alan Jerkins at Saratoga, and while Sierra Leone had to settle for third that summer in the Travers, he would, of course, go on to win the Breeders' Cup Classic. This work, guys, got just under 4,000 views. And you want to know why? I mean, Randy, you probably can guess this already. Because everybody wanted to see if Sierra Leone would go in a straight line. That was the most clicked on. I'm not sure anyone watched the work in its entirety. It was like, let's see what this cage bit does. Let's watch it over and over and over again and see how straight he is. And that was the one reason why. So thank you, Sierra Leone.
Be a smarter, better with XBTV. The best horses. With thousands of exclusive morning workouts. All at your fingertips and delivered right into your inbox. Everything you need to be informed. Be smart. Bet smart with XBTV.
All the thrills. Fraction of the bills. Experience the power of the partnership. Change your life, make new friends, and compete at the highest level of thoroughbred racing. West Point Thoroughbreds, the gold standard in racing partnerships. Visit westpointtb.com.
Meanwhile, as always, West Point Thoroughbreds, one of our sponsors here at the TDN Writers Room. And West Point is wrapping up a special season for Terry Finley and Debbie Finley, who founded West Point, with a single low-level claiming horse way back in 1991 at Philadelphia Park. They've come a long, long way. And in 2024, they had a breakthrough in the depth of the roster. 24 stakes wins have fueled a stable record for purse earnings, surpassing their previous record mark of $8.8 million. By early November, with still a month left to go. Carson's Run started in the 3-year-old grass division for Christophe Clement. He won 2 legs of the New York Turf Triple. Vava landed a memorable triumph in the Derby City Distaff on the Kentucky Derby undercard for trainer Cherie DeVoe. And, of course, stoking the flames for 2025, the most recent West Point horse we've talked about, the 2-year-old Bullard, has emerged as a force early on the Kentucky Derby Trail with 2 straight resounding wins, including that one last week in the Bob Hope for trainer Michael McCarthy.
You know how long I've known Terry Finley? I knew him when he had hair. That's how long, when him and Buzz Chase used to go around and look at yearlings together. Buzz Chase was brilliant. He really was. But that's how long I've known Terry Finley. And for him to do what he's done it's been years, but it's still a comparatively short period of time, has been absolutely amazing with West Point.
I thought you were going to say you were in the Army with him.
Quite a success story there. All right, guys, let's move on. What was the race of the year in 2024? I think this is a no-brainer. I want to see if you guys come up with something else, but it was the Travers.
Yeah.
Fierceness wins by a head over Torpedo Anna. Look who was third, Sierra Leone. Look who was fourth, Dornock. And it's not just that they had a bunch of good horses, but the drama of the filly trying to beat the best colt out there. She came so close, almost got it done. This to me is a slam dunk. I can't even think of the second best race of the year.
Yeah,
Randy?
I agree with you. But since you said that, I'll go to the second best race of the year, and that would be the closest finish in the history of the Kentucky Derby, a 3-horse total finish. And now Zoe's always got to come up with something else.
I got nothing. Oh, damn you two. Yeah, I was the Derby for me. It will be the Derby. Some good races. And honestly, the Classic was a very, very good race as well.
Absolutely.
She pulled that one out, the Classic. Yeah. All right.
That's because Zoe's a pro. All right, so we move on. What races would you like to see Torpedo Anna go for in 2025? Kenny McPeak has said at first he's going to concentrate only on filly races, the Apple Blossom, things like that. But knowing Kenny McPeak and his thirst for like these challenges and his desire to really prove his horses at the very top level, could you see him running Torpedo Anna in the Breeders' Cup Classic? All things being equal, she has a good year. She doesn't get hurt, etc. I think she might, and that's what I'm going to wait for.
I can see it. Yeah, I mean, you've got the Whitney as well, if he really wants to try that again. And I'm sure he will. It really depends on how she comes back next year.
Exactly.
It's going to be dependent one race at a time because she'll be a year older. Like I've said time and time again, she's not easy on herself by any means. So it's not like she's going to get turned out for a few months. She's still got to train every day and she's hard on herself. So he'll probably take it one race at a time. Would it be great to see her beat the boys, beat Fierceness? Wow, wouldn't that be amazing to see that rematch? We'll see.
Yeah. I mean, we've all seen horses that didn't come back, quite as strong from one year to the next. If she comes back and performs just as well at age 4 as she did at age 3, just as dynamic as she is in some of her better races, Kenny will be aggressive. I mean, he showed that in the Travers, and I'm sure he'll run her against the boys at some point. And depending on how she runs in that race, hell, he may run her against the boys multiple times. So yeah, it's all TBD, but it's certainly something that we have to look forward to that is going to be a lot of fun to think about.
So, of course, we're also looking forward to the horses that will be turning 3 any day now. And of course, that's on January 1. What newly turned 3-year-olds are you most looking forward to watching develop in 2025, or any other horses you're excited to watch? Go for it, Zoe.
I need to go first because we might be on the same horse, myself and Randy. Sovereignty. For Bill Mott, son of Into Mischief, out of Bernardini mare, owned by Godolphin, broke his maiden in the Street Sense by 5 or 6. He's the real deal. I am really looking forward to seeing him.
So visually impressive in his races. If I had to pick one horse right now for the Kentucky Derby, and this is an important caveat, that we have seen run, then I would say Sovereignty would be first. But right now, the newly turned 3-year-old that I'm looking forward to the most is probably one that hasn't even started yet. And it's probably in the Bob Baffert barn in Southern California, to be honest with you. Or maybe the Todd Pletcher barn at Gulfstream Park. But something is going to emerge with some sensational performance, like Nisos came out of nowhere last year. And unfortunately, he didn't pan out yet. He didn't pan out last year as a 3-year-old to make it into the Triple Crown races. But that's the thing about thoroughbred racing now in 2024 and 2025 is that so many of these 3-year-olds don't make their debuts until much later than they used to in the past. So it's kind of always a work in progress until you get to like February or so. And even then, I mean, when did Justify make his first start? February?
Was it? Yeah, it was February, late February.
Guys, I think you're overlooking the obvious. East Avenue. Now, he's not somebody who we're going to see come out of the woodwork. It's not going to be somebody we're going to see being a first-time Baffert horse that costs $26 million and wins by 10 lengths. But this horse was brilliant in the Breeders' Futurity, looked like the horse to beat in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile, and stumbled badly at the start and lost all chance. To me, he won't be the Eclipse Award winner because he didn't win the Breeders' Cup. That'll go to the Baffert horse. But the fact that he was brilliant before that can completely throw out his race in the Breeders' Cup, is in the hands of a really smart outfit. I think he's the one I'm looking forward to watching in 2025.
Yeah, can't argue with you there.
Well, that's a wrap on this week's show, and I want to thank my compatriots, Zoe Cadman and Randy Moss, and all the people that work so hard behind the scenes, Katie Petruniak, Sue Finley, Anthony LaRocca, and Alila LaRocca. Happy holidays, everybody. Hopefully 2025 will be a winning year for all of you.
Can we get them in here? Can we show Sue and Katie so everyone can see the rest of the staff and Anthony? There's Sue.
There's Sue.
Hey!
There's Anthony. There's Katie.
Yay! Where's your Christmas tree?
Those are the MVPs, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we're just like.
And there's Katie's tree. I only have
Katie's tree. Kentucky blue.
Behind me.
But that's
would
the
have
team
dressed up if we had known.
that makes it work right there. Well, you're looking as festive as Bill, Sue.
That's not saying much, Zoe.
You're not wearing a beaver, but that's okay.
I'm not going there.